to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. Welcome to another episode of Talking Supply Chain. I'm your host, Brian Strait, and today we're joined by Jan Snoeckx, Director Analyst in Gartner Supply Chain Practice. Jan has been researching the emergence of agentic AI in supply chain planning. In a recent Gartner report, he and his colleagues predicted that by 2030, 70% of large organizations will adopt AI-based supply chain forecasting. And just recently, Gartner released new research showing that autonomous planning has passed the peak of inflated expectations on its supply chain planning technology hype cycle, which means that it's moved from the hype phase into practical value. In this episode with Jan, we're going to dig into what that shift means for demand planning, visibility, automation, and the evolving human-machine balance inside the planning function. First, though, I'd like to bring in our guest today. Jan, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show, Brian. Really nice to be here today.
Great. I'm excited for the conversation today. I think this will be good. And we talk a lot about AI, but I think there's a different perspective here, which I'm excited to get into.
Mhm.
As we get started, though, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit. We've all heard the term agentic AI a lot in the last 6, 8 months. Can you kind of walk us through, though, at a high level, what that means in the context of supply chain planning and how agentic AI differs from more traditional forecasting and planning tools that companies have traditionally relied on?
Yeah, sure, Brian. Yeah, and agentic AI is indeed all over the place across all business functions and of course also then within supply chain planning. And that's also why I actually covered it during our Gartner Planning Summit just last week in Denver.
Mhm.
Now that vendor traction and overall market traction around AI agents in planning doesn't come really as a surprise to me because, yeah, planning tools, they started to integrate traditional AI building blocks like statistics, heuristics, and optimization already a few decades ago, long before people were actually using that term AI. And in the past, we would call these agents engines and scripts. And now, yeah, everyone calls those agents. Now is it an all agent washing that you see taking place in the marketplace? Well, no, because with the arrival of machine learning and more recently these large language models that we all know through ChatGPT, we do see exciting new use cases emerge, such as touchless forecasting and scenario planning automation. And those new AI capabilities that we see coming in the market are not replacing, but rather enhancing what is already there. And that is really a key aspect to understand of what is happening in that marketplace for buyers or people that just wrap their heads around what is going on.
Yeah. One of the nice things that we have, your supply chain manager review, we have this nice relationship with Gartner, and we
Mhm.
publish a lot of thought leadership from a lot of your analysts. We did recently publish something from you, actually,
Yeah,
on the plan, on
thank you.
where you kind of described planning's evolution, and you
Mhm.
kind of explained it
Yeah,
in the what happened to what could happen aspect.
exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what some of the biggest forces are that are driving that shift across planning today?
Now, with the arrival of cloud, hyperscale compute, and newer AI forms, planning tools can become much better in predicting possible future outcomes than they ever done before. And by doing so, they can help organizations moving from being only resilient into anti-fragile. What does that mean? Well, that means that organizations can now actually benefit from uncertainty rather than just bounce back when there is an unforeseen event. Now, planning has been historically pretty conservative when it comes to introducing new technology. However, when talking to our Gartner clients, we hear that they don't ask anymore if AI can be leveraged in planning, but they ask how it can be leveraged. So there is really a big mindset shift taking place as well.
So we've definitely moved from that theoretical to the how is this actually going to help me kind of stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You guys did some recent research, and I mentioned at the very beginning that you guys are predicting that 70% of large organizations will adopt AI-based forecasting by 2030, which I know seems a long ways away, um, but it's not actually that far.
No.
At the same time, you've also said that autonomous planning has kind of passed its peak of inflated expectations. Can you talk about that? What's changed in this regard, and is it because companies are now seeing real value for these AI-based systems? And I guess importantly, if you answer that, the second part of the question really is
Mhm.
the ones that are not adopted or are not looking at full deployment of AI-based technologies, what's holding them back?
Yeah. Well, so yes, companies see real value, but not only on the AI, but within a broader package or a broader scope of digital technology, I would say. But when we talk about autonomous planning, it's really important to understand that we see it in a much broader context than only demand, because this research about the 70% that is centered
Mhm.
around the demand. But and indeed, touchless creation of forecast is something we really see maturing in the market. But this broader context means that you also need to think about how do you autonomously translate those demand signals, those demand plans into supply decisions on how much you ship and when you ship and make and buy. So that's really the end-to-end perspective that we cover with this autonomous planning angle or lens, whatever you want to call it. And now what we see is that companies are starting to mature their understanding of autonomous. And that is often also, what is holding companies back, the ones that are less mature in their understanding, because the ones that are evolving, they realize that they need to pursue different levels of autonomy depending on the type of planning decision. And let me give you an example. So when you're taking strategic decisions in S&OP, you will have a different level of autonomous planning, also a different approach and different technology support compared to when you do, for instance, real-time order promising. And that is what is moving the dots on the hype cycle
Mhm.
on autonomous planning and addressing also that huge potential of going into touchless creation of demand forecasts.
So that hype cycle is what you just mentioned there. That we've moved the part past the part where it's promises of what AI can deliver, and now we're looking at the results side of that, right? Um,
Yeah,
but there are a lot of companies out there, I think, that are still sitting in that pilot stage, and maybe they're not ready to make that move to a scalable, enterprise level deployment, if you will. Can you talk about what the companies that are ready to make that move and have made that move, what distinguishes them from those companies that are maybe hesitant to jump out of the pilot stage? And what missteps have you seen that hold people back,
yeah.
prevent them from making that jump?
Yeah, sure. On the one hand, it's of course about resources. It's needless to say that companies that are moving are actually also putting resources against that lift. But that is tied to having a vision and a strategy. And that's where we see that most successful companies are those that actually have a long-term strategy. And long-term, I mean 5+ years, where they not only focus on AI, but also cover an overall technology and data approach, as well as the process evolution and redesign. And one of the common missteps we observe is that companies focus too much on individual productivity gains with AI. And it's very tempting these days with these general purpose assistants. And yeah, when they do that, they actually miss out on a lot of opportunity when you actually look for impactful solutions that focus on speed and quality of planning decision making rather than only productivity, if that makes sense for you.
Yeah, so I think that's in essence what we've seen this before with technology over the years, right? It's really about targeting where you want to go with the technology, and
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and not just deploying technology, right?
No, for the sake of
It's
technology. True.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what separates companies that are successful now too. The companies that just deploy it because somebody in the C-suite said, "Hey, install AI," right? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
No. Yeah.
they're not necessarily doing it in the best way and what's best for the organization.
No, not at all.
I want to touch on a term that you mentioned in some research that you've done, and the term is touchless forecasting.
Yeah.
I hadn't really heard that before. Maybe it's common. I just haven't heard this. But can you kind of talk about what touchless forecasting is and whether that's something that the average organization today can do?
Yeah, well, really good question. And yes, they can. And it actually means the fully automated generation of demand forecast
Mhm.
that sits within the overall process of demand planning. So people that think like, now we're going to run our demand planning process fully touchless with no human involved. Well, let me kind of disappoint them there. No, it's really about that initial step of creating the baseline. And now historically, the creation of that baseline has been done through statistics with quite some manual fiddling of data and parameters and kind of quite some touches and effort involved. And now that's where we see a shift. When I talked earlier about how we see additions, here we see more replacement of statistics by machine learning models
Mhm.
that create patterns out of historical data for future rather than extrapolating. And those machine learning models, they can make that initial part of the process fully touchless. So that's like all the fiddling and all the manual work gets stripped out because you also kind of make it much more professional through data science work. And even more important, you not only take work out, but you also create the opportunity to start adding market intelligence data that historically was layered manually on top of a statistical baseline. Yeah, if you think about in-market drivers, like downstream information and data, that can now be added to those models, and then you also reduce the work, the manual addition of those drivers by making it part of the model. And that is what we mean with touchless forecasting, actually.
All right. So as you go to that, though, you're relying on the data being correct. And as we know, in these AI systems, data is the system, right? I mean, it's without the data, the AI can't really do its job. So as you guys work with clients, as you look at this, the data quality is so important. What kind of challenges do you see from a data quality or an integration standpoint that planners can face when they decide they want to move to an agentic or an autonomous planning system?
Mm.
And what do they do to solve those? I mean, how do you overcome those challenges that exist?
Yeah, well, I think it's fair to say that not all data challenges are within the control of the planners, right? And so there are quite some data challenges that need to be tackled by a larger part of the organization or through IT. But planners do play a very critical role in the whole mechanics of advancing with the function, especially when it comes to translating their mental decision models into the software, into the tools. Because you can think about all the data that you need to predict, but if you do not feed that system with information on how you make decisions based on those predictions, then you don't move work and intelligence from the planner into the system. And that is, of course, where planners have a really critical role to play to actually identify and clarify their decision models individually, but also within a team, within the whole organization, and start to feed that into the planning system so that you actually move the decision models from people's heads into the machines to put it a little bit simplistic, and having the machines then actually interpret and refine and improve over time. That
Yeah,
is their role.
yeah. So I want to shift gears just a little bit to a couple of different topics over the next few questions.
Mhm.
One of which I think this is so important is that technology sometimes can do things that organizations aren't really ready to do yet, right? The organization doesn't trust that the technology can do it. And just like when you hire an employee, you got to trust that person can do the job, right? You've got to trust that the technology can do what you're doing. So as organizations look to deploy these types of AI or different types of AI or other technologies, are there cultural or structural shifts that planning organizations need to do internally so that they can get to the point where they can rely on what that AI is generating and get themselves from a pilot stage where maybe they're sitting there saying, yeah, I'm not really sure that this is what I want, to get to that full stage, full scale adoption?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because we have indeed talking a lot of technology until now. And technology for sure still has challenges to come into an agentic AI state. But out of our Gartner research, we see that the number one bottleneck is with organizational and cultural level, what you actually highlighted. And I often compare it with the change I've had to go through myself when allowing my EV to take control over the speed and the steering wheel in my car. And I really had to let go of, yeah, you're laughing, but it's really a journey. I had to let go of old habits and create
Yeah.
new ones. And a lot was related to control and trust. And yeah, I think you relate to that. And now if you think about it with the car, it's only me that needs to go through that journey. But then when you think about the planning function, then we're talking about a whole organization. We're talking about processes that have been designed over a long period of time where everyone will need to let go of the steering wheel to be successful. And that is a major undertaking, because you really have to go across all the processes, all the people. So taking it step by step is kind of the only feasible and reasonable approach. And when shaping those steps, it is recommended to define your end state, and then have also clear business benefits with every step so that everyone stays very well aligned on why you do it and how you do it over time. That is
Yeah.
kind of the approach we recommend there.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the car example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even a better example than maybe that a lot of people would
Hmm.
connect to is just anxiety when they do try something new,
Oh, yes.
right? I mean, a
Mm.
lot of people have anxiety that builds up when you try something new, and until you actually go through it, sometimes you can't overcome that, right? You just kind of have to push through sometimes and get through that and whatnot. So I think anything an organization can do to help employees get through that initial anxiety stage, if you will, and then learn
Yes.
that yes, the system can do this and you can trust it to make good decisions as long as going back to the earlier question, the data we're putting into it is good data.
Yeah, and
So
that's a journey, yeah. And this old-fashioned way of handling IT projects doesn't work with that kind of transformation.
yeah.
That's very clear. Yeah.
Want to ask you about risk. This is an area that's come up a lot lately. I've had a couple of
Yeah.
conversations with people recently about how AI can assist in risk and agentic autonomous AI. We obviously, as supply chains, we're facing a lot of disruptions and risks these days, and some of it's geopolitical, some of it's supplier instability. Even companies, when you launch a new product, there's risk involved in that as well. Can you talk about how AI plays a role? What can and what can it do from a
Yeah.
risk or a disruption standpoint to help identify those things for companies?
Yeah, so our position is that with the planning technologies that are all out there today, companies can become much more proactive in evaluating uncertainty on
Mhm.
their supply chain. And by doing those evaluations, they can identify the risks that are associated with those uncertainties. As we see, it's really an emerging practice, so very early days, but we see more and more companies looking into what we call experiment-based planning, where they leverage probabilities. So they really apply a data-driven approach to run like thousands, tens, thousands of planning simulations. And yeah, running simulations has been done in the past to actually then generate plans, but it's not so much about making then single number plans out of those calculations. You run those experiments with probabilities to actually get results out of those systems to define what we call resource policies. And that is kind of a guardrail principle to help make decision making within a certain range of uncertainty. And that is
Yeah.
where we see industry moving towards at to my liking way too slow pace. But it's very early days of that approach. Yeah.
Yeah. You're very gracious with your time today with us. All these questions I've asked you, and the next one I think is going to be the same thing, is we could do an entire podcast on any one of these individual questions. So,
Mhm.
we are kind of touching on some of this stuff, which is great. It gets people some exposure. But another topic that comes up a lot with people, and again, we could do a whole podcast on this one question, I'm sure, and that is what AI is doing to workers and their productivity and their time, right? Your research shows that autonomous planning can free up planners to focus on more complex, high impact decisions instead of the mundane kind of stuff. and this is where, this the whole podcast could do it, but maybe if you just give us a high level
Mm.
look at this,
Yeah.
what what does that actually look like in practice for a planner that might be listening out there and say, well, what is this actually going to mean for me and my job?
Yeah, I'll keep it I'll keep it short because yeah, indeed we could do a whole podcast on just this one question. But for the planners that are listening to the podcast, that really means that they don't spend time anymore doing manual manipulation of data, nor doing manual planning or making corrections of
Mhm.
yeah, planning algorithm outputs, but that they instead actually monitor and steer planning agents, like we call them now agents, but so they monitor and steer these agents, and they actually do that by spending much more time and effort in walking and talking with the business to capture strategies, priorities, and then translate that into agentic goals that then feeds into the monitoring and the maintenance of these agents. It's like again my EV is driving without me touching the steer, and sometimes I just give the steering wheel a little notch to the left or to the right to keep it within the lane that I wanted to stay within, and that is how it will look like for planners in future, or some might already be partially in that situation where they really stop doing all the manual work they do today, and become much more analytical, and much more business mind, because it will be more about strategy and priorities more than ever before. And it's
Yeah,
actually, I think, because I've been a planner a long time ago as well, it will really elevate that profession and that activity of planning.
yeah. And for those of you listening, Jan is located in Belgium, lest you think he's driving down a highway in the middle of Iowa, not paying attention and not steering his vehicle. Um, although there are certainly
Yes.
plenty of people in this country who are doing the same thing as well. So, um, we've talked a lot in general about stuff. Can I ask you, what industries or segments of industry are you seeing that are moving the fastest towards the autonomous planning right now? And are there lessons that can be gleaned from those companies or
Yeah.
those sectors that others can adopt?
Yeah, I would say high tech industry by far. On the one hand, we see that they're typically less conservative, and also have quite some analytical skills and know-how internally dedicated to supply chain. And I think what we can learn from yeah, high tech industries, and it's in general, you always have outliers, but that many of those actually are really good in establishing an AI centric or native or whatever you want to call it culture, like really kind of making people very enthusiastic about pushing the needle with AI, and how they actually handle resources and skills to move fast. Um, that's yeah, two key learnings I would say from that industry, where we see yeah, quite a lot of movement.
So, and I think that ties into my next question, and that maybe the companies that are a little slower to adopt, or the industries are slower to adopt. It's something that I think we call the innovation dilemma, which
Yeah,
is you want to adopt AI and automation, but you still have these legacy systems, right, that dominate your operations and your planning. So for that company out there that still has that legacy system that's doing everything right now, what's the smartest way in your mind for them to prioritize a transformation process? Is it simply replacing those legacy systems? Is it adding intelligent agents, AI on top of what they have? Are they looking at
yeah.
redesigning everything? What can you say about that, and what advice would you give for those organizations?
Yeah, there are of course different pathways, and there is really no one size fits all, because even if you have legacy, your current state of legacy can be very scattered or can be quite unified already. It also depends on your ambition, of course, where you wanna land, but just assume that everyone want to get to autonomous planning. Now, historically, planning has been done through on-premise systems, and that wouldn't allow for continuous innovation, because you would like, yeah, implement, deliver on on-prem, and it would like be stuck there for quite some years, because Yeah, often companies only go to market again once a decade on a planning system, a bigger package at least. But nowadays, a majority is moving to cloud and SaaS, making that being it now legacy planning platforms, as well as tools that are being used for specific decision intelligence automation, that they keep current. That means that those applications get new functionality on a regular basis. And that actually means that that innovation dilemma that you were referring to earlier, that it becomes less current. It doesn't go away completely, but that your initial platform choice becomes even a much more strategic choice. And that is then also my one piece of advice, that you put even more effort and thinking into your system landscape going forward.
Yep. And as I think about this, there's another component, that external factors, right, that contribute to how quickly you adopt a technology or anything. We've
Mhm.
seen this, I think, in industry a lot with the geopolitical climate these days, as far as how quickly companies may be reshoring or nearshoring or altering their supply chains, and whether they're willing to make that investment to do that. The same thing holds true with the technology, and AI is no exception. So how do those external forces, whether it's geopolitical, it's regulatory, sustainability expectations, things like that, how how do those forces shape the speed at which a company is willing to embrace a switch to an AI-based planning system? And do those forces factor into the ROI equation as a company tries to determine whether now is the time to make that investment?
Yeah, well, there is this saying, "I never waste a good crisis." And the ones that you mentioned, they go right down the alley of supply chain planning and driving almost always business cases that then get justified by service capital or asset utilization. Now the market for planning solutions, supply chain planning solutions, has been growing at double-digit rate for quite some years, and we also project that into the next years to come. Exactly because of the reasons you mentioned. Now, from an ROI calculation perspective, there we see kind of a little shift with a higher focus on cost compared to a couple of years ago. And that cost, that is associated with business becoming much more uncertain, and becoming then a bigger driver in the equation to justify an investment. Where, like, if we think about Corona, that was more about, hey, we have so much uncertainty. It was not so much about cost, but about uncertainty.
Mhm.
That then was a bigger driver for investing in AI-based planning tools.
Yep. I mean, you touched on ROI there, and I think for a company that looks for an ROI on a system, right? They need something. They need to measure that in some way, right? That requires metrics. So, can you talk about what the metrics are that they should be looking at? I mean, obviously, forecast accuracy or cost reduction may be two key ones that companies look at. But is there a set of metrics out there that define what a successful autonomous planning program looks like?
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned two classic ones, of course. Now, if you think about it, the success is actually best measured by metrics that
Mhm.
reflect the quality and the speed of decision making, because planning is all about making sound decisions, forward looking. And yeah, the speed you can measure in cycle time for updating plans, as well as measuring the time between when an unexpected event takes place and then having a plan in action. So that is something you can really measure on how well you can do it today, and then how well you do it with the AI transformation. Now, with regards to quality, we actually see that a lot of organizations actually struggle with defining what good looks like, especially at the supply side. The demand, you mentioned yourself, accuracy, that's very straightforward. But at the supply side, saying like, this is a high quality plan, and this is how we make them today, not how, but this is the quality of the plans today, and this is after going through a transformation, is actually not so trivial. And so what we see there is often secondary KPIs that are being used, for instance, technology adoption rates. Yeah, following, of course, an assumption that technology by default will lead into higher quality decisions, and measuring higher adoption consequently will also mean better decisions coming out of it. And yeah, their companies, in our opinion, are sometimes taking a bit too much a leap of faith with regards to the metrics and the KPI. So quite some work there, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah, it's still a work in progress, right? As they say.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. I want to get in two final questions in a few minutes we have left.
yeah.
This one asking you to put on your forward-thinking hat a little bit.
Mhm.
Going back, we talked a little bit early on about the 70% adoption by 2030. So as you look out to 2030, is there an inflection point or some tipping point that you see that will either accelerate our journey towards AI
Yeah.
based planning, or is there something that you could foresee slowing down this journey?
Well, that's now why it's so awesome to be a planning technology analyst right now, because we are actually right in the midst of an inflection point with primarily industrialization of these large language models coming into planning solutions. And those LLMs, they will really play a crucial role in the further development of all sorts of agents within planning.
Yeah,
Though I would say, and I said it before, real agentic AI, with a definition of having a composable system of multiple agents that operate goal-driven, autonomous, and are able to handle complexity within a dynamic environment. Well, we're a bit away from that, and so there are big technology hurdles to take at that side, big promises, big challenges. But organizations don't need to wait and see, because in order to accelerate and make use of that momentum, they can already start changing their ways of working, making the organization much more AI aware by reskilling their people, and also, and that's maybe not so, how to say it, overlooked, let's say, is or avoided more, is reimagining the ownership and the liability of making those decisions. Because of course, if you start to automate decision making with systems, then how are you going to manage that system behavior? And that comes back into elevating the role of the planner, actually. But so looking ahead to 2030, the agents are here, they will stay, and this in the coming years are going to be super determining for supply chain planning, especially how technology will look like for more than a decade to come.
yeah. But 2030 will be here much quicker than we all think.
Absolutely, yeah,
So I want to ask you one final question,
yeah,
and that is an advice question, right? So I think those out there listening to us today, hopefully a couple of them have listened to this and said, "Hey, I really need to get on this journey in some way." So for those that are now sitting here saying, "Well, we need to start thinking about moving from the traditional demand forecasting to an agentic or AI-driven planning system over
mhm.
the next couple of years." Can you kind of talk briefly about what the roadmap to doing that might look like?
Of course. And my advice will be counterintuitive, because I think a lot of listeners will expect me to say, educate yourself on all these types of AI. And I would advise to start by looking at your business and supply chain strategy. Look at those two and use that as a foundation to create a compelling vision that aligns with your business priorities now and in the coming years. And that vision you can use to drive organizational awareness on the need to change, as well as on the potential of technology to help being successful. Because in the end, you will go after resources, you will need money, you need a lot of stuff from a broader organization to be successful. And that's what you need to start doing. And you can only do that when you start from the business and the supply chain strategy. And do that, work the organization before looking further into technology. And needless to say, don't look for AI agents for the sake of agents. We are still looking for solutions that strike a balance between proven and innovative capabilities to actually make sure that we're successful. And that is
Yeah.
kind of the advice that I give in that area.
Yeah, so start with that self-analysis really and
Absolutely.
understand yourself before you can solve a problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Jan,
Well
thank you
said.
so much for joining us. It's a fascinating time for planning professionals these days. Your insights are fabulous. And like I said, I think a lot of these topics we could dive into full episodes on any of these topics, and maybe in the future we'll do some of that.
Yeah,
But thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it very much.
you're
So,
welcome.
we are out of time. I want to thank my guest today, Jan Snoeckx from Gartner Supply Chain, and all of you who took time out of your day to listen to us. New episodes of Talking Supply Chain drop every Thursday. You can find them on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Brian Straight. Thank you for listening. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.